Let's paint purple flowers in watercolor. The paper that we use here is Fabriano Artistico 300 gram hot press paper with a variety of brushes, variety of watercolor paints. The watercolor paints that I use is quite expensive. Some of them is up to 385 Rand a tube, but please don't be put off by that because you can use ordinary watercolor. The pigment will differ if you use student watercolors. That is the ordinary watercolor that you buy at Pick n Pay. Please do not stop painting because you don't have the proper watercolors that I have used here. Use a different type of brushes, but I also did an introduction video which you can also find on the channel to explain what brushes, how much water, the bleeding of colors and that type of thing. Let's start with this. You need a plastic palette with different holders where you can fill water in, and you can also mix in that palette your different colors. Use a container with water in. Make sure that it's always clean water, a nice cloth, and that is what we will use basically. When you work with watercolors, it does take a lot of time. It does take patience. It is important that you sit down and keep on looking at your subject matter for a success. I've put some water in the center of the palette, fill my brush, and the first technique I want to show you is to wet the area that you're going to work with. There's no paint on my paintbrush. I'm just wetting the first petal that I'm going to be working on. Going to take a little bit of red, mix it into your water so you can have a very, very thin layer of water. And it's extremely important with watercolor that you work from light to dark. Don't go dark immediately. You can put your paint onto the water. See, very, very light. You should actually just wash the white away. So this is wet on wet. I've wet the petal and just added a wash of pink onto that petal. And I'm going to carry on with that, working from a very, very light wash. If you want to lift out color, that is now the time to do that. While that petal is still wet, you'll see that I've taken a little bit harder brush, just put it into water and lift the color up. Later on with this video, I will show you how to use art masking fluid to preserve all your whites. It is a very nice way to preserve whites, especially when we get to the leaves. I'm going to show you how to do that. And now all you do is you carry on with all the petals, wet them, just put a very thin layer over all the petals until you are ready to start with the dark areas. I'm going to speed up this video a little bit because that took quite some time to do. Now that you've finished the rest of the flowers with a very light pink wash, we might consider now looking at a little bit of darker areas on some parts of your leaves, which you will identify from your subject matter. And then from there on, we are going to do the very, very dark areas against that. The reason for that is that we can see the actual color of the flower against the background, if I can say, against the petals. The petals will reflect against the very dark background so that you can actually see the real color of the petals before we start darkening or shaping the different purples and pinks into your petals. Make sure that your painting is dry, and I am taking a little bit of red and a little bit of blue. I am going to mix that together, and I am going to get the dark areas. So there I just look at that petal, making sure that I can just identify some of the dark areas on that. If I refer back to my subject matter, most of the background has got a more of a blue tint than a purple tint. But the blue I want a little bit darker. So what I'm doing now is just take my dark purple and I'm going to go into all the dark areas so that, like I repeat myself, the petals really start standing out. Also, a long process, work with a fine tip of that huge brush. You'll see that I, even though it's a huge brush, I can really work very fine with that. Lay in your color and push some of that color back into different layers, referring to your subject matter. Now that my dark area is nearly done, I am starting with the first petal. First, I am laying a little bit of purple at the back, or let's say at the core of the flower. My petal is wet, so now I'm just plonking some red onto that using water, taking a very dark purple, plonking it onto that red. I'm going to take a paintbrush and marry the two colors to each other, and this is exactly where the magic takes place. You can't really not control it, but it is best for you to make the watercolor actually work for you. The first couple of petals might look very strange to you, but as you get better and as you practice more, you will really feel how the two colors are getting together. You're working with a harder brush, which I just put in plain water, clean water, so that I can lift some of the highlight areas out. That is just the first petal. I've tried the first petal, which was not the main flower, just to get the hang of it. taking a bright yellow with a yet again clean paintbrush, I paint in the core of my main flower. Just first of all, the outlines of where the circle should be, and then I just flick away with my yellow into the petals of the flower. Now remember, it's always working very light to dark. I can always add the dark color on top of that yellow, as long as I don't lose the yellow. Look at your subject matter all the time and make sure that you don't lose perspective on what you're painting. Trying to lift out some of that color, and what I am going to do is take a little bit of brown and just put the brown on where the shadow falls onto the flower. Taking my fine liner, I add dark purple onto that and just outline the petal which I'm about to paint now. If we do the dark areas, you will see the actual proper color of the petal as you go. Very, very important with watercolor. Now, I am going to take a little bit of that outline that I've had there, and I'm going to steal some of the paint that is next to the petal, meaning the dark area there. With my wet brush, I can steal some color. See, the moment I wet it, I can pull that onto the bottom petal, and that will make the top petal stand out. It's about the shadows that we're working with that will make this painting pop. Wetting that petal with a little bit of water, the whole petal, not really painting the color in now. We're going to lay in some color. The painting or the paper at the moment is dry, so we're working wet on wet now. So wet that area. I'm going to take that and see the moment I add that in, it's going to mix with my water. So the top part of that petal will be pink, and where it touches the core, it will be purple. And we need that to marry with each other. Still using quite a bit of water. Now I'm going to the purple or the blue and add the blue next to that, and this is when the magic happens. Can use the side of the paintbrush to use the advantage of all the hair on your paintbrush, so you can work very fine with it, and you can really manipulate your art using the right technique with the right brush. having worked a couple of hours on this painting, I added some yellow into the centers. I made sure that I've got some contrast, make sure that my painting now is dry. So I left it to dry completely, and now I want to use a watercolor pencil. This is an aquarelle pencil, and I am going to use that now to bring out the light areas. You can put some veins in. I press not too hard, but it's very important that your paper is dry by now. So look at your subject matter and add some highlights to that. At this stage of nearly finished the painting and coming back to the petals all the time, I have decided to do the background in color pencil. So I'm playing around with some blues. It has to be the same blue, which is a French ultramarine that I have used in the flowers, even though I didn't use the blue pencil in the flowers, but I'm trying to imitate that. And I'm just showing you that watercolor pencils does a very, very great job, especially if you've got huge areas like that. I'm just scribbling around, playing with the dark, looking at my subject matter, and then after I've laid in my color, I'll make sure that on the edges I do touch the color to make the flower stand out more and push the background back. I will then take a huge paintbrush, fill it with water, and make sure that my colors mix into each other to get a brilliant background. Now it's time for the leaves. I'm using art masking fluid to preserve the light areas of the leaves. You don't have to do that. You can take a lot of hours to paint all the negative spaces in the leaf, but I wanted to show you lots of different ways to work with watercolor. If you use a brush with your masking fluid, be careful that you don't use the best brush you have or the finest brush you have if you're not prepared to throw it away. You can put it in water immediately and clean it, but it does make the paintbrush yucky, and if you can't get it clean, just chuck it away. I am just painting into the yellow areas that I've preserved for the veins in the leaf. I am not going to spend a lot of time working on each and every negative space on the leaves. The leaves at the moment is not really the main concern of the painting, even though it does play a big role. If I didn't want to put a leaf, I could have just enlarged my background, but I did not because I want to show you different techniques. This technique is now using your masking fluid. If you think about it, masking fluid is the same as masking tape. You just don't have to cut the masking tape and put it onto the preserved areas. I'm using the backside of a paintbrush to see if I can have very fine lines. Sometimes it takes out a lot of paint or a lot of masking fluid, and then I just plonk the paintbrush back into those thick areas and steal a little bit of that masking fluid for smaller veins. Now, if you did make a mistake, like I've done here, to put the masking fluid thick, that is unfortunately something that you should look for or be aware of. You've got to make sure that your masking fluid is dry before you start painting on it, because it's like a glue, exactly the same as masking tape, just in a fluid form. You can really find very nice videos, YouTube videos on how to do the fine details on a leaf. It takes a lot of hours. I'm not going to spend that time. I want you to make sure that you don't judge this painting basically only on the leaves. This painting at the moment, since I started, took about 6-7 hours to do, and I have got no interest in doing the leaves in each and every vein. Still using the back of my brush for the small veins. And I'm going to leave that to dry completely. I'm also going to do it at the top leaf, just copy what I've done, the bottom leaf, and wait till it dries. The next step is to take a light green wash. I've used sap green only with water, and I washed the whole leaf. Remember that I haven't removed the masking fluid yet. I'm just washing over that. Some areas will be darker, some areas will be lighter, and I wait for each and every layer to dry before I carry on with darker colors. So adding some dark colors with a watery effect will help me bring out some of the texture of the leaf. Just look at your subject matter and you'll be fine. Now that everything is dry, take your hand flat on your surface and start working into circular effects to remove the masking fluid. You will feel, it feels like pieces of glue that sticks there. So just keep your fingers flat, don't damage your paper. It is vitally important that your project is dry. If you don't work on a dry project or a dry subject matter, your whole painting will get distorted. Adding a layer of yellow ochre and a little bit of green over that, you will now see the result of your masking fluid, where you had your masking fluid applied too thick. Now we need to sit and we need to make some of those veins much smaller. But it gives us a very good indication of where to go. So I just give it a nice wash to get away from the very light area, because the leaf that I'm doing doesn't have any whites in it. So I'm just toning those colors down, and then I'm going to go in with my paintbrush and adjust some of the veins. So where the vein is sprouting from the main vein, it will go thinner and thinner. You'll see where I work at the moment, it's too thick. So there I go with a very small brush, take some greens, mix with blue and sap green, and work those veins slightly smaller. You could have used the negative spaces if you wanted to, but I specifically wanted to show you how to use masking fluid. By using a color pencil, I'm using the yellow just to highlight some of the veins, and then I'm going to take some white and add some white to the finer veins. Look at your subject matter, and that's about where I would like to stop my painting. The most important part was to show you how the petals work, how we combine the pink or the red with the blue, and that makes purple. I haven't really used purple. The purple was only used on the edges of the petals. I would like you to start with this video and copy what I've done. Surely you'll do a much better job than what I did. It is trial and error. We make mistakes and we fix mistakes. The worst thing about being scared of watercolor is the moment you stain your paper, you feel like you can't return, you can't fix it. I've shown you some techniques how to fix it, and I would like you to add your own techniques to this and enjoy it. Please send me a picture. I would love you to do that, because this is challenging if you are not a watercolor artist and you haven't spent a lot of hours with watercolor. But it's absolutely doable. If you are an oil artist, painting oils, drawing, you'll understand exactly what is going on here. And the more time you spend it, the more detail you can add to that. But sometimes we get to a point where this is enough. So my attention wasn't on the leaf. My attention was actually just doing the petals. But I've showed you some background, some petals, the contrast, and so forth. I hope you enjoyed this video, and yes, please do it. It doesn't help you watch it. I want you to really sit and do it.